Is drinking raw milk safe like RFK Jr. suggests? Can you reduce a glucose spike if you eat your food in, quote-unquote, the right order? I'm registered dietitian Abby Sharp. I host a nutrition myth-busting podcast called Bite Back with Abby Sharp. And those are just some of the questions I tackle with qualified experts on my show. There is so much food misinformation and disinformation out there, and it can feel impossible to know what's real and what's BS. On Bite Back, my goal is to help listeners create a pleasurable relationship with food, their body, and themselves, which in my opinion is the fundamental secret to good health. Listen to Bite Back wherever you get your podcasts.
It's the July 4th sale at Bray & Scarf, going on now with huge savings throughout the store. Save up to 40% on GE Profile and Cafe appliances. Or step up to luxury with free installation on select Monogram appliances. Special financing is available. Shop local and save this July 4th at Bray & Scarf. Visit any of our convenient locations or go to brayandscarf.com, where it doesn't cost more to get more.
Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
A new war in the Middle East. Israel strikes Iran, and Iran strikes back. The situation threatens to destabilize the region even further and is casting further doubt on a path to peace in the Middle East. Why is this happening? What is the end game? What will Trump do? So many questions. Let's get some answers. I'm David Smith. Today on The Big Story, it is a great pleasure to connect again with Professor Elliot Tepper, Distinguished Senior Fellow at the Norman Patterson School of International Affairs at Carleton University, an expert on the Middle East and all of its many layers and complexities. And hello, Professor. Great to hear from you again.
Oh, good morning, David.
I'd like to start by rewinding the clock a little bit and looking at how we got to this point. This started last Friday, a massive attack by Israel targeting Iran's military infrastructure and, most importantly, its nuclear laboratory sites, and we'll come back to that as we make our way through the program. The two countries have now been trading strikes all weekend and all week long. Casualties on both sides. As always, civilians have tragically been caught in the crossfire. Dozens killed in Israel, hundreds in Iran. Can you give us a bit of a brief history on the Iran-Israel conflict? Why are these two countries at war?
Yes, I think that's an excellent question because let's go back to 1979. What happened is that Iran got new leadership, which took the country in a totally different direction than it had been. There is no inherent reason why Israel and Iran should have any conflicts at all between them. They aren't contiguous states, not competing over anything. They have some complementarities, which before 1979 was working. Israel's high tech and has a lot of ingenuity, and Iran has a lot of energy, and they're kind of natural partners, which was the case before the Islamic Revolution. When the Islamic Revolution came to under the theocratic leadership, replaced the secular Shah Pahlavi's regime, everything changed. So it's a political decision and ideology. It's a choice taken by the leadership in Iran to go from one side, that is working with Israel, to another, chanting every day just about, but certainly every Friday, death to America, death to Israel. And that's been the starting point. The Islamic Revolution that took over has made it the focus of their foreign policy to eliminate the state of Israel altogether. And that's why we're at war.
So it's fair to say it's a long-running conflict, and this is the latest flare-up, a flashpoint, a point of inflection where Israel and Iran are now directly at war. And the timing of this flashpoint is interesting and worth some examination. There are two factors at play that I'd like to ask you about. One is Iran's nuclear program, And the other is Israel's operations since October 7th that have effectively knocked out Iran's proxy militia groups. Over the past year or so, Israel has seriously crippled these Iranian-backed groups in the region. Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Houthis in Yemen all have suffered serious defeat at the hands of the IDF over the past 20 months or so of war in the region. Now Israel, it would seem, is taking the fight directly to Iran, and this is somewhat new territory. So Israel's pretext for this latest attack is that it's trying to prevent Iran from building a nuclear weapon. Israel says they have intelligence that shows Iran was getting very close to achieving a nuclear weapon. According to some reporting by the Wall Street Journal, there is some dispute amongst U.S. intelligence officials about that finding, but nonetheless, there were diplomatic talks happening between Iran and the U.S. in pursuit of a deal to stop Iran's nuclear program, the enrichment of uranium to near weapons-grade levels. Those talks were scheduled for last Sunday. Ongoing series of talks. There were talks scheduled for Sunday, but then Israel attacked on Friday. Israel's strikes have done major damage to Iran's largest uranium enrichment facility. We know that. And they have assassinated top nuclear scientists and top military officials. But the question is, why now? Iran's nuclear program has been an issue for years. Anybody who has followed this story out of this part of the world knows that Iran's nuclear enrichment research has been going on for decades. And so far, Israel hasn't taken this scale of direct military action against it. So my question is, why now? What do you make of the timing? What is Israel's end game here?
Well, there's a lot to unpack in the combination of things you just spoke about. And I want to lead off at the very top by saying that when we're talking about the Middle East, actually any place in the world, but where there's conflict, but especially in this region, what we see may not be actually what is going on. There's probably a lot more going on behind the scenes, out of our sight, that is actually a determining factor in what we end up seeing. And that there's also a lot of misinformation, just mistakes, and disinformation, deliberate misleading activity. So all I can say is we can see certain things. It's not necessarily the whole situation or the most meaningful aspects. We always have to lead off with that when we launch into the kind of conversation that your questions just raised. What about Iran enriching uranium for years? Well, yes, they have been. They say they have a right to do so. The U.S., as you know, under the Obama administration, actually struck a deal with Iran that they could indeed continue to enrich up to a certain point, a very low level, for domestic electricity use. It was called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. It was not anywhere near comprehensive. It did not cover those proxies that you talked about. It did not cover the delivery systems, the ballistics missiles, which were being mass-produced. And it certainly did not allow the kind of inspection that would be required to make that a serious denial of capacity to quickly go from one enrichment level, 3 point whatever, up to where they are now, 60%, which was very close to 90%. So what was going on here is that according to the International Atomic Energy Agency, and this is a very recent report, have confirmed what actually Israel and others had been saying all along. Iran was, the international agency doesn't put it this way, but they're cheating. They were hiding their assets. The International Atomic Energy Agency and others have estimated that now, already in possession of Iran, is enough enriched uranium for perhaps up to 9 nuclear weapons. So they are a nuclear weapon state on the cusp, unacknowledged, but certainly possible. And they have delivery systems in the terms of their Air Force and their ballistic missiles. Israel then said, okay, Mr. Trump, you pulled out of the original agreement. You were correct to do so. You are now trying to work on a new agreement. We don't think it's going to go anywhere. We have reason not to trust these people. The International Atomic Energy Agency has just given us new material, but we respect you, and we don't want war. What we want is for there to be not a nuclear threat, remembering that Iran has said right from day one that, it's death to Israel, and now they're developing nuclear weapons and delivery systems to make that happen. But go ahead. So Donald Trump said, I'm going to give this a try. Israel said, diplomacy is the way out. 60 days went by. Donald Trump said, and I'm not going to let this drag on and on. They're not going to play games with us, not with me, Donald Trump. I'll give them 60 days. And indeed, 60 days came and went, and it was very clear to Israel and other observers that, in fact, nothing was happening in terms of coming to an effective agreement to be sure that there was never going to be a nuclear weapon state in terms of Iran. And on the 61st day, Israel decided they had to attack. There's a window here from Israel's point of view. Iran's proxies, as you've pointed out, had been decimated. Also, the fall of the Assad regime in Syria, which was a very close ally until then of Iran, had also been taken out of commission. So they lost that. Israel, after Iran had attacked Israel directly, had removed the air defense systems inside Iran. But the window was that Iran could be rebuilding the relationship with the proxies while they waltzed the Americans around on terms of negotiating. They could then be rebuilding their defensive capacities, and meanwhile, they could very easily be moving in the direction of becoming a nuclear weapons state. Israel saw that window was closing, and they acted accordingly.
So one objective here, and one piece of that window, is the need to prevent Iran from achieving a nuclear weapon. That's a military objective for Israel, physically destroying these facilities so that Iran can no longer add to its stockpile of enriched uranium. But the question has also been raised, Professor, about regime change in Iran, above and beyond preventing or curtailing this uranium enrichment program. How does the question of a regime change, doing away with the theocratic dictatorship, the Islamist dictatorship in Iran, factor into the equation here?
In terms of stated goals, that is not a stated goal of the operation right now. The stated goal is to be sure that Iran does not become a nuclear weapon state. Change of leadership in Iran is certainly a possibility, because we know that there's been uprising after uprising against this regime by the people of Iran. The people of Iran are really suffering as a result of the nature of this type of regime. It's now known to be corrupt. It's now known to be violent. We know that this is a regime that the people of Iran have been trying to overthrow repeatedly, but they've been put down with great viciousness. So the possibility then, when you start this kind of operation, that they lose their legitimacy to the point where finally the opposition can cohere. There's been two problems with the opposition. One, at home, they're put down with such severity and violence that they've not been successful. And the diaspora has not been able to get together in a united fashion in order to come up with an alternative government. But once this kind of loss of face, the fact that this regime is vulnerable, it is not all powerful, and that in fact, if the U.S. and Israel wanted to, they could probably assassinate the leader. Possibly regime change might be the end product. It can't be the stated goal of Israel. You can't use the machinery and tools that Israel has at their disposal. It has to be a matter for the domestic situation inside Iran as a result of this violent regime being shown to be impotent.
One more point on the question of regime change. And again, it's a question that's out there. It's not a stated aim of Israel's campaign. If a regime change in Iran comes about as a byproduct of this conflict, would a new regime in Iran necessarily be a benefit to regional stability and to Israel's security?
The answer is no one knows what would actually come after the fall of the regime. Would it be a coup d'etat? there's a lot of speculation that, in fact, the theocratic trappings of the regime actually are a cover for the military rule of the IRGC, that this is really a military dictatorship already in effect with the cover of the theocracy around it. Would a military coup just remove the regime and then say, okay, we want to be even worse? Would the possibility come that, yes, the internal opposition they don't want to pull away from the West. They don't want to be isolated. This is one of the great civilizations in the world. The people have been suppressed from their natural capacities to be a very positive part of the world. But the chaos that could follow the fall of the regime could lead unpredictably. It could even lead to the dismemberment of the state. This is a very large country composed of ethnic minorities here in various places. Perhaps that would come apart. Also, coming back to your question on nukes, one of the speculative aspects of this is if Donald Trump does not wish to take part in attacking, and we're coming to that in a moment, that chaos following the fall of the regime would give cover to Israelis to do something they really don't want to do now, which is put troops on the ground to go into the underground bunker to take it out.
It's the July 4th sale at Bray & Scarf, going on now with huge savings throughout the store. Save up to 40% on GE Profile and Cafe appliances. Or step up to luxury with free installation on select Monogram appliances. Special financing is available. Shop local and save this July 4th at Bray & Scarf. Visit any of our convenient locations or go to brayandscarf.com, where it doesn't cost more to get more.
That's a good segue into the next question. And the really big question, at least from a international relations standpoint for us here in the West right now, is what will Donald Trump do? The U.S. at this point is not at war with Iran, but the president has made some very evocative statements on the conflict this week. For example, he's called for a, quote, unconditional surrender from Iran, and he's said that the U.S. knows where Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, is hiding, and that he's choosing not to assassinate him, quote, at least for now. So the question is whether the U.S. will join Israel's offensive strikes on Iran. Iran has a large nuclear facility which has to this point gone relatively unscathed at a place called Fordow. It's buried deep under a mountain, and security analysts say the U.S. is the only country with a bomb powerful enough to take it out. President Trump has to decide whether the U.S. will intervene or simply sit back and support Israel in a defensive capacity from the sidelines. What do you think will happen?
Well, Donald Trump has put it very plainly. He said, I don't know. You don't know. No one knows. I might or I might not intervene. So here's the current state of play as near as I can tell right now. Donald Trump has moved from plausible deniability to taking ownership once the Israeli very complicated attack on Iran showed great signs of success. So they've gone from saying under Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, we had nothing to do with this, to now Donald Trump, just now, a day ago, saying, we now have total air superiority. Nobody does it like the great USA. Saying, therefore, what you see in Iran, that is, there's total air superiority, isn't because of what Israel is doing, but of what the U.S. is doing. So moving from plausible deniability to taking ownership, sort of. And the sort of aspect is this. The speculation is that there's great split within the MAGA movement between those who say the U.S. is never going to get involved with forever wars. It's none of our business. We should just let everybody else fight it out. This doesn't affect us. This is a unanimous feeling by the globe that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, and Donald Trump is going to see to it. The cutting edge of that, as near as I can tell right now, is that inside the movement, the MAGA movement, there's emerging the possibility that, yes, a one-off use of American weapons would be in keeping with America's interest, not siding with Israel and going to war against Iran, but using the B-2 bombers and their bunker buster weapons, which only the U.S. has, to take out that heavily, and there's 300 feet of dirt and cement, that heavily fortified nuclear site. If you just do this as a one-off, which they did before, remember, they assassinated the head of the Al-Quds force under Trump 1.0, but they didn't follow through with anything. It's a one-off. So that may be the cutting edge, and it may be an indicator that Donald Trump is willing to perhaps actually to do something that a lot of people, you've probably heard this phrase, taco, that Trump always chickens out. And the term chicken hawk is sometimes used to the people, about the people around Donald Trump, that they talk big, but they won't act. But the state of the play, as we're talking about it right now, is that the possibility does exist Donald Trump will decide to use American force on a one-off basis. But at the moment, nobody knows.
What would some possible implications be for geopolitics in terms of reaction from some of Iran's allies, namely China and Russia, should the U.S. intervene here? It seems like you're saying it's possible that it could be a one-off intervention and it may not spiral into anything bigger. But what if the U.S. intervening on behalf of Israel here does spark some kind of broader conflict? Is there a chance of that?
There's always a chance when war is underway that it will escalate and often in very unpredictable ways. The possibility certainly does exist. What's fascinating right now is basically nobody seriously is coming to the aid of Iran at all. And this includes some surprising sources. After all, Russia has a security guarantee, a signed security agreement with Iran, because Iran is providing all those drones that are attacking Ukrainian civilians. But no, Russia is being quite circumspect, in fact, saying, why don't you let us come in as mediators? We get along with everybody. But Russia has to be very cautious because they also don't want to antagonize Israel, with whom they have an interesting tacit agreement. You don't attack us and we won't attack you. The Sunni states have been saying, under the leadership of Saudi Arabia, this is before this particular situation, we want stability in our region. We want development. We don't want any kind of war. We're going to warm up our relationships with Iran, even though we are, in fact, 1,000-year-old competitors for regional dominance. But right now, all we want is stability. We've got all this money to spend on our future and on buying things. So we don't want war in our neighborhood. None of them are coming out really in any meaningful way in support of Iran. Qatar is saying some things. But what's fascinating is that the vaunted Arab street is silent. That is, over and over and over again throughout the long history of conflict in the arenas, a lot of the Arab states have said quite quietly, look, we would like to do something to be helpful here. We would like peace in our region, and we don't really like, we're not fond of any of the players, but our street would revolt against us. The Arab street is also quiet. China gets, 18% of its oil from, or so, along that magnitude, from Iran, and they get it at a big, steep discount. They don't know quite what to do. Now, all of this is putting into question a lot of established assumptions. To me, the logic of the situation is, if Israel is really as successful as they appear to be, then all those states we just talked about will also reassess their relationships with a defeated Iran, or an Iran that's no longer able to terrorize the neighborhood with their proxies, or to terrorize the world with the prospect of becoming a nuclear weapon state.
Okay. So, in closing today, right now, this conflict seems very far away. It's a war between foreign states in a foreign land. But when we speak about how what happens in the Middle East impacts the broader global community, Let's talk about Canada and Canada's interests and the interests of Canadians. There is a deeply Canadian connection to this conflict. Can you speak about that for our listeners,
Well,
please?
indeed, I can. And I'm very pleased that you brought this up, David. The reality is that, first of all, if Canada finds itself in a more nuclear world, that is, if Iran does become a nuclear weapon state, weapons proliferation will happen all across the region almost instantly, and a much more uh, less of a rule of law state and more of a big power state. A global situation is bad for Canada. A country like Canada depends on basically a calm international environment where we can operate and use our strengths. But we have a very particular situation when it comes to Iran. It goes back all the way to the dawn of the Iranian Revolution in 1979. People may remember the Canadian Caper, where Canada took in Americans, diplomats, and hid them and helped smuggle them out. A famous movie was made on this. So right at the very beginning of the coming to power of the Iranian regime that we see here, we came under basically the crosshairs of the administration, the new administration. We're in the bad books already. We're starting off as being basically enemies of the regime by helping the Americans escape. So the Canadian Caper, which is quite a notable feature in Canada's diplomatic history, is there. But much more recently than that, and much more imperative in a sense, is that when the Ukrainian airline, Flight 752, was taking off from Tehran and was shot down by the Revolutionary Guards with 138 Canadians aboard, people on their way to Canada, connected to Canada, we became immediately a factor. They were killing Canadians. This was later, they tried to hide it. They did not close that airspace, which they should have done. They thought the Americans were attacking, so they shot down this airline. And I was tangentially involved. I was invited by friends to go to memorials here in town. Carleton University flew flags at half-mast, so did Ottawa U. So we lost people there, but we're not only those people. We also have Canadians who have been killed by the regime. Zara Kazemi, a Canadian and Iranian joint citizen, a photographer, was arrested and she was taken to Evan Prison where she was brutally raped and then murdered. Professor Adami from Laval was also killed in prison. We have very specific reasons to be concerned with the brutality of this regime that's in power now, and the fact that the people of Iran continue to try to overthrow this government means that at some point Canada may have a role in making a decision. Are we going to support the people who want to overthrow this government from the Green Movement and all of the atrocities that were committed by the regime against its own people? Are we going to stand with the people or with the regime? And that question may be coming.
Okay. We will leave it there for today. Professor Tepper, thank you so much, as always, for your time and your insights.
Thank you for the opportunity, David. It's always good to work with you and to bring these issues into the public conversation.
And again, that is Professor Elliot Tepper, Distinguished Senior Fellow at the Norman Patterson School of International Affairs at Carleton University. And that is the big story for today. You can send us feedback on this episode or any other episode. Email us hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca or leave us a voicemail at 416-935-5935. You can find us on the Seeker app or wherever else you get your podcasts. Please remember to rate, review, follow, and share. I'm David Smith. Thank you for listening.
Everything from clothing to household items are getting more expensive each day. The world of fast fashion has complicated clothing production by shipping cheap parts around the world to whoever can sew them the cheapest. And now you, the consumer, are paying the price with rising costs. American Giant is about keeping things simple and close to home. They aren't affected by tariffs because their products never leave the U.S. Skip the tariff and snag yourself American-made clothing with American Giant. Get 20% off your first order when you use promo code STAPLE20 at American-Giant.com. That's 20% off when you use code STAPLE20 at American-Giant.com.